Do you feel like you're stressed out by the ever faster changing world? Let me introduce you to Retroism. Well, I'm sure the term Retroism doesn't exist, but it doesn't really matter. You can refer to it as anything else you want. Actually, the topic of this video is more about being happy and cope with the world situation. However, I wanted to discuss leaving the modern world behind. I had the impression that I was constantly consuming and chasing something. I felt very awkward around people. Even more, I had a lot of FOMO. Social media put pressure on me to conform to certain stereotypes. But in the last few weeks, now that my final exams are over, I've noticed a significant gap in my life. For the previous 12 years of my life, I was socialized to feel productive by doing homework for school. It took me some time to get used to managing my newfound free time. I nearly made the mistake by using social media to fill the void. But one day when I woke up, I decided to renovate a room with my spare time. And that's when my interest in retroism began. I became afraid when I realized how much I would use social media, so I set out to reduce my use. I began by looking through flea markets for interior design ideas for my room, and I was drawn to the retro vintage look. But retroism isn't the only answer, but for now I want to advocate it. I mentioned the problem of using social media and feeling burnt out while doing nothing. The constant and increasing consumption. And the transformation from human beings with free will to objects reduced to columns of data. But why is this? Why do we feel so empty and why do we use social media? The feeling of emptiness can be explained by the nature of ourselves and the nature of social media. The problem arises when we scroll through TikTok, for example. The short videos are full of fast-paced information, effects and cuts, which is a lot of work for our brains to process. Especially when you consider this in the context of media use. And then there is a much bigger issue of dopamine. Dopamine is a hormone that does not seek pleasure, as many people think, but makes you want something and therefore act on it. If we believe a certain action leads to reward, our dopamine level rises, and so there's less motivation for action, which take a lot of time or aren't as rewarding, even if we enjoy them normally, like our hobbies. So dopamine is the reason you stay motivated. Meanwhile, social media activates this hormone, and apps like TikTok capture the user's attention while leaving them unsatisfied. So the user seeks that satisfaction without being really satisfied. Furthermore, due to the hyperstimulation of our brains, the threshold at which dopamine is released rises, and normal activities that are not as engaging as social media do not reach the threshold, so we feel less motivated to do them.
Before I talk more about the feeling of exhaustion and talk about where the problem comes from and like do a little bit deep dive into that, I want to talk about attention span. Attention span is really important to understand the topic of feeling exhausted, and the problem with attention span is that a study reveals in the year 2000 we had an attention span of 2 minutes, and then after that nowadays we have an attention span from 45 seconds, and clearly between that lies social media and or media consumption, and the study it's revealed is the reason. So we clearly need to take attention on attention span because if you just try to get rid of social media habits or so, you got handicapped from the beginning. So like if your attention span is 45 seconds, it's much harder for you to read a book or so and easier to watch TikToks. And so that out of the mind, let's get back to the feeling of exhaustion and what boredom has to do with it.
Imagine this is your focus, like you're studying for something in a library, but then the door closes or you smell coffee and your mind starts to wander. It thinks about coffee, about the last time you had coffee, about the date you had while you were drinking coffee. All thoughts come into your mind and eventually you focus again. So this state of mind is boredom. It can be triggered by a certain event or it can just happen, and there are different ways to approach it. On the one hand, you can try to get from the scattered part back to the focus more easily. For example, caffeine helps, or certain meditation exercises that allows you to control your sensory organs. And on the other hand, we face a much bigger problem: boredom itself. And there comes retroism. If we compare how older generations deal with the scattered phase and how our generation faces it, you will understand why social media is that important in this topic. So again, imagine the scene. You study back in the 1980s in a library. You learn for something and your mind is focused. But eventually it shatters and you become bored. So you take a comic book and read for a while until your mind focuses and you study. Nowadays, in comparison, you open social media, there's a problem. The big difference is that social media is based on algorithms which feed you dopamine and therefore let you engage into mindless scrolling for 3 hours. At some point you realize that you want to focus because you should learn, but you just can't. And there it starts where you feel stressed out. On the one side, you're exhausted from processing this much information, and on the other hand, you crave for dopamine. And learning isn't as engaging as social media, obviously. Additionally, you think about the things you just saw on social media and can't focus on learning. So, for this problem, there are numerous solutions, but I want to talk with you about one in particular. So you can obviously just brute force your way through that problem and just try to not use social media or your digital device, but in the end you're addicted, like everyone, like I am also addicted a little bit, but you can try to reduce this addictiveness. And a big part is obviously attention span and dopamine. So you could try, like I talked about in the last section of this video, if you're bored, don't use your digital device
but use a book. Or, for example, one really good thing to do is stare at a white wall and let your thoughts wander around. You will pretty soon realize how funny it is, but it is also a little bit boring because it takes a lot of time. So what is my big solution, and therefore what is Retroism all about? I talked about it a little bit, but now I want to present it to you. So there is this idea that your habits are based on your identity. Lastly, I read a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and in one chapter he advocates this idea of that your habits, your activities are based on your identity. And this I want to use this idea because a lot of people want to change their habits but don't change their identity, and therefore they need to use a lot of willpower to have a constant hobby. Good example is working out. Working out is, I think, really hard if you need to motivate you every time to work out. So it is much more easier to work out if working out makes you fun. So you can gaslight yourself into having fun while working out, and you can do that with changing your identity. If your identity is being a healthy person or being someone who works out, then working out makes you more fun. And this concept we can use for social media. I myself started to realize that if I change my identity from someone who uses a lot of social media and is scrolling on TikTok or Instagram to someone whose identity is more like, yeah, being that guy, being that person who is like in the 80s, back in the 80s, is pretty cool for me, and it makes me appreciate more the things people did back then, because back then there were no social media or digital devices and they still had a lot of fun, or more should I say, they had, because of that, more fun maybe. And so I adopted a little bit that lifestyle, and I realized that I would appreciate more the things in life, and I wasn't as stressed out as before. And that, I think, has a lot to do with reducing social media. I choose for myself the retro aesthetic, and I think aesthetic is like the main part about it, because it makes more fun to you because you're invested in it, and aesthetic is something pretty cool. And so I want to say that you can choose the aesthetics, the identity you like, and maybe it's something in the 50s, or it doesn't even have to do with the period in the time, but it can also be like dark academia or something like that. If you're unsure in which direction you want to go, you can just go on Pinterest and search for aesthetics and choose one you like. Just try a little bit out, but you will pretty soon realize that it will reduce your stress and makes you appreciate more the life.
At the end of this video, I would like to summarize it. The reason why we feel stressed out comes from social media, be it over consumption, constant bad news, or false body images of FOMO. A big part of it is dopamine, so it is imperative to lower the threshold at which dopamine is released. Normal activities like hobbies cannot compete with these overload on social media. But we want dopamine to be released during these normal activities. So the solution is to make social media less appealing, because once we start looking at TikToks, our attention span decreases and we can no longer focus on the activity we were doing before. Stopping this by sheer force of will is exhausting, so changing your identity gives much better results and is easier. You can choose which identity you want to pursue, but identities that relate to a time when social media wasn't a thing are the best, like Retroism. Retroism is an identity for me that allows you to do more tasks that people did in the 80s and therefore less tasks that have to do with social media. So your stress will go down and you will be more fulfilled.